If you're a first-time home buyer, or maybe you already own your own home, but you're interested in buying your first rental and don't know where to get started, in this video, we'll be covering all the steps from A to Z that you need to consider when buying your first property or your first rental. And at the end of this video, there'll be a link to another video about how investors find good deals. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already, because in that video, I talk about some of the metrics that I look at in order to calculate my return on investment on a particular property to determine whether or not I am getting a good deal on a property and whether or not I should buy it. And the key is that I am buying a property that is going to make money in the long run. And the very first step we're going to talk about is financing and getting pre-approved. But before we do that, if you're new to the channel and haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on the latest in housing market trends, because I put out daily and weekly videos on how to invest in real estate as well as housing market updates. So make sure you're subscribed to catch that. And it takes a lot of time and energy to put out videos like this, and subscribing is a free way you can support the channel and is much appreciated. So the first step to financing a home is getting pre-approved. Now, when you are buying your first property, if it is an owner-occupied property, meaning it is going to be a home that you plan on living in, then the financing terms are going to be much different than if it's an investment property. Typically, owner-occupied properties require a much lower down payment because banks view them as less risky loans, since they know you're less likely to default on a property you are personally living in. Now, at the end of this video, I will link another video as well about my favorite first-time buyer investment property, and it's a great video to watch. And the reason I made that video is because it shows you how you can get into a multifamily property with very little money down, whereas normally investment properties require 20% down when you purchase, and it's a great way to house hack. So that's a great video to check out if you haven't seen it already. But the bottom line is that you want to get pre-approved and start the conversation with a mortgage broker so that you can get financing, because that is step one in the deal. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can finance real estate, from hard money loans to conventional financing that has stricter underwriting guidelines. And my general recommendation is that when you're just getting started investing in real estate, avoid hard money loans until you know what you're doing. Warren Buffett says that there's 2 rules to money. Rule number 1 is don't lose money, and rule number 2 is, you guessed it, see rule number 1. And if you get a more traditional conventional loan, although the returns might not be as sexy as doing a BRRRR deal, BRRRR being an acronym standing for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, a BRRRR deal does require a little bit more skill, and especially in today's market where you have housing prices on the decline, it is a terrible time to find yourself in a situation where you're trying to renovate a property in a falling market. So step 1 is get approved for a loan through a lender, and the video linked at the end talks about FHA financing and how to buy a multifamily property, meaning a property with multiple units, like a mini apartment building, with as little as 3.5% down. And in some instances, you can buy those with no money down. So now that you're pre-approved for financing, the next step is to start researching which properties you want to buy and get a profile of your ideal property mapped out. The reason it's important to get pre-approved for financing before you start the research process is because financing will determine what your budget is. And the number one thing that a seller is going to want when you put in an offer is a pre-qualification letter or pre-approval letter, so that they know you are a qualified buyer that isn't wasting their time. Now, when you start researching what your ideal property should look like, the things you want to take into consideration are things that are going to make you money. What I mean by this is, what is the price per square foot of the property that you should buy? How many bedrooms does it have? How many bathrooms will it have? And what is the rent range for that specific property? And the key is to be realistic, because if you think you can get $3,000 rent for a property, but find out after you buy it that you have to drop the rent to $2,400 in order to get it rented out, you want to make sure that you were conservative in your guesstimate. And a simple hack or trick is that what you can do during this process is pick out a few properties and ask a local property manager what they think they could rent for. The bottom line is that a good property manager will be straight up with you before you buy a property, because they don't want to have to argue with you about dropping rent in order to get a property rented. So they will set you up for success from day one and set you up with realistic expectations. And if you think you can get $3,000 rent for a property, but a seasoned property manager says, no way, Jose, you're only going to get $2,500 for this, then it doesn't mean don't buy that property, but it does mean that you want to buy that property at a much lower price to account for the fact that your rents are going to be lower than you originally anticipated. Now, in addition to these few points I just mentioned, there's a few other metrics and considerations I want to point out. The most important consideration for any property is location. If you are a new real estate estate investor and buy a property in a very desirable location, even if you're not turning a huge profit on it. The good news is that having a desirable property will mean you are likely to have low vacancy. You want to know what attractions are nearby. Is it in a good school district? Is it close to shops and restaurants? Is it a safe neighborhood? But the key research points you want to know is what purchase price you are looking at and how many beds and bath it needs to be in order to be profitable or at least break even your first year. If you are buying a property in a desirable location, sometimes the cap rate will be lower. And I explain what a cap rate is in the video that's linked at the end. So if you don't understand that, don't worry about that now. But the bottom line is you want to understand how much you have to spend on a property in order to get a property that you can cash flow and get a clear picture of what this property looks like on paper before you start shopping. That way, when you start looking for properties, you know exactly what you should be offering on a given property in the area that you are looking to buy because you did your research. Now, after you've done your research, the next step is to find a realtor and preferably an investor-friendly realtor. All realtors, if you ask them if they are investor-friendly, they will tell you, yes, I'm investor-friendly. Of course, I'm happy to sell you a home. But a quick way to gauge whether or not this is the case is ask them a simple question when you're interviewing them, such as what type of cap rates are you seeing in this area? For example, let's say you were buying a rental property in Boston. I would call realtors and say, hey, I'm interested in this particular neighborhood in Boston. I see that it's close to X, Y, and Z college, and I've checked the crime data, and it seems like a pretty safe neighborhood, and it appears that there's a lot of rentals here, and I was just curious, what kind of cap rates do you think I can get in this area? Now, if they don't know what the you're talking about, then they're not an investor-friendly realtor. At that point, maybe make some small talk and probably move on to the next one. Keep in mind that typically cap rate is a metric that is more often referenced in commercial and industrial properties, but every investor-friendly realtor, especially in the multifamily space, will know and be familiar with this terminology and will be able to make sure you're getting a good deal on the property. Now, the reason you do all your research first before shopping for a realtor is because if a realtor is telling you something that contradicts all the data that you've just researched yourself firsthand, then you know that that realtor is not the person for you and you can move on to someone else that is more informed in the area. Then once you have a realtor, the next step is to start looking for homes and putting in offers. Now, find a handful of homes that would work for what you're looking for and put an offer in at a price that makes sense to purchase. For example, a seller is trying to sell a property for $1 million, but you are going to have a 7% interest rate on your mortgage when you buy it, then you better make sure you're getting at least a 7 or 8% cap rate within a short period of time, because otherwise there's no point in buying the property. This is why doing your research and identifying what a property will look like on paper is so important, and it's important to do first before you start your search for properties. The key during this process is to be patient, because you do not want to find yourself buying a property that does not make money and turns into an expense. Remember that you got into real estate investing so that you could make money, and one of the best ways to make money is by not losing it. When I bought my very first rental, I was only cash flowing $250 a month, and after my first year, a few repairs and expenses whittled that down to a little over $100 a month, but I was still very proud of that because of the fact that I was able to positively cash flow that property from day one and start building my portfolio. The bottom line is that in the beginning, you don't need a home run that is going to make a ton of money. If you just get your foot in the door and start small with baby steps of progress, before you know it, you will look back and have a huge portfolio of cash flowing real estate, because your rents will go up every single year. At least that's true most years, but over a 10 or 20 year time period, you have time on your side. So you just want to make sure you are patient during the buying process. You want to find a property and put in an offer, and once that's done, it's under contract. It's just like a typical real estate transaction, but assuming you're a first-time home buyer and you've never done this before, I'll spell out what this looks like. Now, once you put in an offer, if the buyer accepts that, then you go under contract. You will then deposit your earnest money at the title company, which should be fully refundable if the contract falls through. Make sure you read the contract, because one time I was buying a property and they wanted me to sign something guaranteed what's called specific performance, and my realtor said, no way, do not sign this, because it meant that I was on the hook to purchase the property no matter what, even if I couldn't get approved for financing. And now after you're under contract, you'll have a series of objection deadlines and we'll have a home inspection. Take what the home inspector says with a grain of salt, because a lot of them don't know what they're talking about, quite frankly, but at least you'll know what the age of the appliances expenses are, if the roof is in good condition, and basic things about the condition of the property so you know what kind of expenses you're looking at after you own it. There will almost always be problems with the property, so if they say it needs a new furnace or a new water heater or the roof is in bad shape, do not be alarmed. Use that instead as a bargaining chip to get a discount on closing costs or even cash back at closing. If a major issue arises that you simply can't afford and you don't want to buy the property, then this is a good opportunity for you to fall out of the deal, and you will only be out the cost of the home inspection. But just keep in mind that properties require maintenance, so there will always be issues that come up during the inspection. This is normal. Try not to be dramatic about it, and your realtor will appreciate that advice. The best thing you can do is not get attached to the outcome, and remember that there are plenty of deals out there. Real estate is bought and sold every single day, and do not force a deal that either isn't going to cash flow or is a major pain in the ass because you're walking into a lot of repairs that you just don't want to deal with on your first property. Now, if you're a DIY kind of guy or a tradesperson like an electrician or HVAC technician, then you're probably happy to fix this stuff on your own when you move in and won't let it scare you off. But the bottom line is be patient and don't FOMO into a property at the height of the market. Patience is key. Now, at some point in this process, you'll drop off the rest of your down payment at the title company, and once you close on the property, the loan funds, the seller gets paid off, and the title transfers to your name, and congratulations, you are officially the new owner and you just bought your first rental. Go out and celebrate for 5 minutes, then get back to work. Remember that a rental property is only an investment if you have it rented out and you're earning income on that property. The clock is ticking, so if it needs minor repairs or a new dishwasher or a new sidewalk or something prior to getting it rented out, then chop chop, get to work and get it rented out ASAP. Now, in order to rent out a property, if you're wanting to be a hands-off landlord, which I recommend doing at some point, it might be good to just start with a property manager from day one and let them handle the process of getting the property rented out. Because honestly, you probably don't want to buy a bunch of properties that you have to personally manage, because you'll eventually just end up dealing with headaches and might get annoyed with the whole process when your whole journey as a landlord might have been a lot more enjoyable had you just hired a property manager from day one. Now, I find tenants very easily through apartments.com and Zillow.com, and it's been a great way for me to background check people through the app, because these services do income verification as well as background checks to make sure that you're renting to a qualified tenant. Now, the laws for landlords and tenants vary from state to state, but apps like this typically help you be compliant in your specific market and can do everything from advertising the property for you to background checking prospective tenants as well, and ultimately even help you in drafting a lease. Again, if this sounds overwhelming to you, there's nothing wrong with having a property manager, and normally they will charge a very small fee, somewhere around 10% of the monthly rent, in order to manage the property. Oftentimes this is money well spent. I've actually never used a property manager, but that's because when I first started investing in real estate, I wanted to get my hands in the clay and see what it was like. But I'm getting to the point where going forward, we'll probably start to hand over these responsibilities to property managers in the future. And that's it. That's the basic ABC steps of how you go from no properties to your first investment property. The bottom line is you are probably making it more complicated than it needs to be, and don't let the process overwhelm you. And I will tell you that as of the filming of this video, if you were going to go out and try to find a good investment property today, but feel like you can't find one, I would not be surprised. And that's because interest rates are sky high and sellers are stubborn right now and do not want to sell at a reasonable price. This video was filmed as of the end of July of 2023, and right now, because interest rates are high and housing prices have not started to come down yet, there are not a lot of good deals out there that are easy to cash flow. So in a market like we have today, the key is to make sure that you are patient and find a realtor that knows what they're doing and doesn't try to FOMO you into a deal that doesn't make money. And as promised earlier, right now there's a video popping up on the screen with more information on how to analyze a deal and how investors find good deals on properties. And it talks about some of the investment metrics that I look at when analyzing whether or not a property is a good deal. So check that out if you haven't already, and we will catch you on the next episode.